Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a college coach conversation. You may notice on our branding that we have some new faces. We're going to officially recognize some of my co-hosts who you've heard many times before as hosting the show and moving away from the idea that it's hosted by me with them as guest hosts. So you want to check that out. And we're also adding a new host to the show, Shannon Vasconcelos, who frequently comes on and does the listener Q&A with me, is being promoted to full-fledged host. And so you're going to start to see her hosting some of our shows moving forward. Hope we're going to present the same great content that we always do, just kind of acknowledging that there are a whole lot more people involved in hosting the show than just me moving forward. So I hope you all enjoy it. Today's show, we are talking mostly summer. I live at a ski resort. I'm looking at a mountain covered in snow right now, and I'm liking that because I like to ski. However, I am dying for it to finally be summer here pretty soon. And I'm ready to talk about it and dream that it's going to be summer sooner than it probably is in reality up here in Maine. But before we get to that, we are very excited. I'm very excited today to welcome a high school student to the show. We don't have them on the show very often, but she's going to be sharing her story about how she started and runs her own project. And the student is Michelle Wasserman. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we were actually chatting before the show and you were asking if we mostly interview high school students. And I said no. And I think that the last high school student we had on the show might have been my son, although I'm not sure. We may have had another one since then, but it is always fun when we have high school students on the show since this is all about you guys. So Michelle is a senior at Great Neck North, in Long Island. And Michelle, you created Dance for Joy, and tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so Dance for Joy is a program I've created, definitely with the help of the owner of the dance studio I dance at, which I think is some important background context, is that I dance 6 days a week for hours professionally in a studio in Port Washington, which is just 2 towns away from me. And Dance for Joy is a class I created at the height of the pandemic that just gave students and parents who could not afford to send their dancers to dance studio for classes an opportunity to dance for free and to just truly have fun, because to me dance is joyful, which that's where my name comes from.
Right.
And I want to be able to share that the gift of dancing and expression through dance with other people that might not have the same opportunities that everyone does.
Got it. Okay, so I love that. And you mentioned that kind of the timing for it was at the height of the pandemic. So, how did it come to pass that this is when you decided to launch this project?
Yeah, so as many students, probably all across America and the world, were learning on Zoom, it was very unmotivating. I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but I'm sure a lot of people felt super unmotivated and bored just going in between class to class on Zoom and joining different Zoom links. So I got thinking, what is something I can do to give back and to help others, and especially during this time when so many people lost their jobs, what's a
Mm-hmm.
way that I can give back by also having fun myself and enjoying the process too, because this was a really big time commitment and still is. So I wanted to make sure I was enjoying everything while also giving back. So I was taking a dance class on Zoom and I started thinking, I just love dance so much and I want to help others, like I mentioned earlier. So
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, it was a little bit hard because of all the restrictions with COVID. But the second year, so the last 2020, so 2021, um, is when my idea started coming to fruition. I reached out to many different dance studios because at first my dance studio rejected my idea just because of limited funding.
Right.
Um, and it was really hard to get many dance studios to fund this program because it is expensive and they're donating the studio space and so much more. But I didn't give up. I was very persistent and I reached out to the studio I danced at again and they said yes. Um,
How'd you convince them to say yes?
So I had to come up with a business proposal, write a whole paragraph essay type formatted paper,
Mm-hmm.
and I just had to write out all my plans, how I was going to market the class, how I can raise money for the class, how I was going to get students to join, how I'm going to plan the class, from something as small as ballet shoes to playlists to funding. It was all listed out on this proposal, and that convinced them.
Got it. So did you end up doing it just at your dance studio, or did you get some other dance studios to agree to it as well?
So no other dance studio agreed with it throughout my whole entire town, and neighboring towns, except for my dance studio, which I'm really happy about because I already have such a deep connection with all the faculty and students at the studio. And this program, I really belongs at Bear S Dance Studio, which is the studio where I dance at.
Got it. And just so that everyone, all of our listeners are clear, so you came up with the idea during the pandemic, but it wasn't an online dance program. It was a real dance classes in person at your studio.
Yeah, so the idea came up, like I thought of the idea during the pandemic, but it took so much time to plan and to figure out all the little details. So the class actually just launched last September.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you mentioned that you had to come up with a business plan. How did you even know how to go about that?
So I'm the vice president of the club, DECA.
Mm-hmm.
It's a business club. I'm sure many students listening or parents know about it. It's very well known. So I have like a lot of training in business through competition times and also just taking college marketing and management through my school. So I have a little bit of experience with that, and I just love being super creative and thinking of all these marketing ideas and how we can best reach our target market, which in this case was the dancers' moms
Mm-hmm.
and parents, sorry, and the dancers themselves, which was also challenging because I wanted to make sure that we wouldn't insult anyone by advertising a free of charge philanthropic dance class, but also make sure that the right people were receiving this and not someone that was taking advantage of the free classes.
Right, right. You wanted the people who truly needed the free classes to be able to take them, right? Not just, oh, it's free, I'll do it, even though their parents could have afforded it, or maybe even they could have afforded it. Got it. How did you do that? I'm just curious because that sounds difficult.
Yeah, I think that was the most challenging part, aside from actually teaching the class, was making sure I reached all the right people. And my first step was to reach out to local churches, synagogues, all the elementary school guidance counselors that knew this information about the students and the parents, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the best way. And also, a lot of the moms reached out to me and gave me other moms information that they knew would appreciate the class. So a lot from the schools, churches, synagogues, and other moms.
And were you targeting a specific age group, or how did you decide on that piece?
Yeah, so I've been dancing since I've been barely able to walk. So I can dance pretty well and I can teach pretty well, but I also wanted to make sure I was significantly older than my students. So they were 3rd to 5th grade.
Okay, got it. So you were targeting that age range. So you narrowed things down. I love that you were using some skills. So you had two things that you enjoyed doing, right? You had dance and you had DECA, and you brought those two things together for this idea. And my message to the people out there listening is this is where a great project comes from. It's not something that you say, oh, I need to start a club, and it's kind of not, it's disconnected from everything else that you do. You always want to look first at, like you said too, I think earlier, you love to dance and you wanted this to be fun. The project's not going to be successful, or it's certainly not going to be as successful if it's sort of just something you're doing because it's good for your college applications versus something you're doing because you really have an interest in it. And in your case, it really brought together these two interests, business and dance, with a third key goal, which is doing something for your community, doing something locally. And I think that for me also stands out because a lot of students do community service. They go down to the soup kitchen, or they go and they take an expensive trip and they build a house somewhere. And I'm not saying that any of these things are bad. They're definitely not bad. They're things that people do that help the world and or the community, and that's great. But what feels more powerful about this is that it's really so important to you, and you are bringing something to community that really represents something of yourself. And again, all of those things together is very, if I put on my admissions hat, that's the kind of stuff that starts to make you go, oh, wow, that's really cool. That's pretty impressive stuff. So well done on your part. And How you mentioned that you had the idea during the pandemic and you just started teaching the first class. What was the total time frame to take you from, the concept to actual execution?
I'd say probably 4 months.
Okay. So a decent amount of time. It wasn't like you had the idea and then 2 days later you were up and running with your class.
No, because also a big chunk of the time went to just reaching out to all the studios and trying to get them to accept my offer. And I
Right. Well, and the another big piece that I'm taking away too is you don't always take no for an answer, right? So your studio said no. You went everywhere else, everybody else said no. And at that point, did you kind of take a step back and how did you reapproach your studio? What was new about what you did the second time around?
So what was new is they mentioned that the problem of why they couldn't have this class is the funding issues. So I reached out to I reached out to my studio again with ideas of how we could fund the class.
Got it. And
Yeah.
what were those solutions? How did you come up with fundraising and stuff?
So for just attire, I reached out to all of the different students at my dance studio because we have donation bins just within our studio because you go through leotards and ballet shoes really quickly and
Hmm.
you grow out of them so quickly too. So all of the attire that all the students wore was lightly worn attire from other students, which
Okay.
saved a tremendous amount of money. Um, and the studio space, we just reached out for donations from everyone in our studio, everyone in the area. Um, that was for the first year. The second year, which I taught this class again this year, this fall, um, Newsday wrote an article about the dance program, and we got a tremendous amount of donations through that, which was super, super helpful.
Amazing. So how many students did you start with and where are you at now?
So I started with 8 students, and just because it's myself teaching it, the first year was just myself. It stayed at 8 students, but this year we had 10, and then I had another dancer help me.
Got it. And you're going to graduate. You're a senior. You have what, 2 months left before it's all over and you go on to the next step. What happens when you leave?
So actually, I was just speaking with the owner of my studio about it this past week. We both chose 2 dancers that we think are super passionate about dance, super giving, loving, and are great dancers to teach this class next year. So we're in the process of training them and teaching them how to advertise and teach the actual class itself and how to address different situations.
Got it. So when you started this, was your thought that this would live on after you graduated, or was that not really in your head at that point?
I did not think it would get to where it is now. I just thought this was going to be a one time class that I taught, but then the owner of my studio asked me to teach it again, and she loved this class so much that we're continuing it for as long as we can.
I love that too. And what's great about that is you're leaving a legacy. And so, it really, you're maximizing the impact because if you help a third grader learn to dance when they're in third grade and they love it, they're going to want to keep doing it in fourth. And so it's nice that this program will exist and allow them to keep doing that. So that's really exciting.
Also, just to add on to what you said, Hearts, it's a foundation in Port Washington, donated a tremendous amount of money for the dancers that I taught to continue dancing in my studio. So I taught them the basics, but now they're able to dance with the other girls that are at their age level and continue dancing and perform at all the shows, which I think is super rewarding because their lessons don't just end after my class ends. They can continue to show off their skills.
Yeah, that is really exciting. So congratulations to you. I love this. And I really appreciate you joining the show and sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we wrap up, I just thought of one other question. Any advice that you would give to a student who's listening and thinking, oh, I'd love to do something similar, whether it's in dance or something completely unrelated. Any advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I think my number one piece of advice is to make sure that you're really passionate about what you're doing and enjoying every step of the process because it's definitely not easy and it's very long, but I enjoyed every minute of it. And I think it really motivated me to continue and also to be really persistent and to not give up.
I love it. It's great advice. Michelle, thanks so much for joining. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about summer jobs. So don't go away.